Which bubble teams look set to sell? Which bubble teams look set to buy? And how is that going to affect the fantasy landscape? I've got Frank Ammirante on to answer just that question on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the Sunday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Pick Six. My guest today is Frank Ammirante, senior sports writer at thegameday.com, also a contestant in Tout Wars Head-to-Head. Frank, how's it going?
How are you doing? Pleasure to be on the show this Sunday morning, watching a surprising low-scoring game between the Phillies and D-backs. I thought some runs would pour in that one, but it's okay. Excited to talk about buyers and sellers at the deadline.
Yeah, I'm glad you're still willing to talk some baseball, even though your Blue Jays probably have bummed you out a bit these first 3 months. If you want to just do an emergency pivot and we can do a Euros Copa America pod, and we can try to pull that off right now. Are you good to stick with baseball?
I'm good to stick with baseball, even though I've enjoyed the soccer, and the Jays season has been, like you said, infuriating. They just can't seem to get it done with runners in scoring position. I really hope they clean house from a front office perspective in the offseason, and I know we'll get into them. We'll talk about the Jays as sellers, but I really hope they don't trade anyone like Vlad Jr. or Bichette. I don't anticipate they will, but it would really, upset me if that happened.
Yeah, we will be predicting which teams will buy and which will sell, and I think you've already teased your first prediction. I don't think there would have been many people who would have guessed that you'd be expecting the Jays to buy at this point, unfortunately. But hey, speaking of the Blue Jays, why don't we turn to them to kick off the headline portion of the show? And it's not really any more positive here either. Aurelvis Martinez hit with an 80-game suspension for PED use. In his case, apparently, according to him, it was part of fertility treatment he was seeking in the Dominican. I have never tried to buy fertility drugs in the Dominican, so I can't comment on the likelihood of that. Have you, Frank?
No, I have not. Who knows what the real issue is there, but quite disappointing to see that. I've been waiting all season for them to call up Aurelvis Martinez, maybe give them a boost to the lineup that they sorely need, the Jays. And, right away the suspension hits. It just adds more frustration in what's just been a horrific season.
Is there any fantasy implications for that beyond, drop Aurelvis Martinez if you picked him up already? Because he wasn't actually even getting playing time, at least in the first couple games this week.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's really any fantasy implications. If you were like a hopeful stasher in a league where maybe you have an NA spot where you didn't have to waste a roster spot, it's time to drop Aurelvis Martinez. Obviously he's out 80 games, but like you said, they weren't playing him every day, and they want to give some opportunities to Spencer Horwitz, and so it's a disappointing finish to Aurelvis' season for sure.
Yeah, I guess with the timing of the suspension, have the Jays quite played 80 games? Is he technically going to come back for the final 2 games of the year or something? Kind of doubt it. Definitely not holding on for those games. So unfortunate. We'll have to wait until next season to see what Aurelvis Martinez can do. Elsewhere in the headlines, we've got Taijuan Walker heading to the IL with a blister. Seems to me like the Phillies just finally had enough and decided we need to find some excuse to get Spencer Turnbull back in the rotation. Would that be how you'd read this situation?
Oh, absolutely. And it's frustrating that they had to even make this move, the Phillies, and switch Turnbull for Walker. But at least now we have a wide opening for him. Turnbull was impressive earlier in the year and definitely should pick him up.
Yeah, I would say that for sure. He didn't necessarily keep up his dominance initially after he moved to the bullpen, and maybe there's going to be a couple rocky outings as he ramps back into a starting workload, but maybe not. I think I'd be interested in using him potentially right away in quite a lot of leagues, really. He was just that good. And he had got a new pitch, too. I believe he had added a sweeper and changed organizations, and those are the times when you want to buy into a guy who doesn't look like the pitcher he was before.
Yeah, exactly. Whenever you see a surprise performer backed by a change in like a new pitch or something like that, it's definitely exciting, and hopefully Spencer Turnbull can pick up right where he left off.
Yeah. Elsewhere in injury news, Giancarlo Stanton, he has hit the IL with a hamstring injury, a hamstring strain in his case. Poor timing for the Yankees, because if this injury happened just about a week ago, we'd be seeing Jason Dominguez in the majors. We were all wondering what it would take for him to get there, with the Yankees having a very full but also injury-prone outfield. Well, timing just didn't quite work out. What would you see as the main beneficiaries of Stanton's absence? Are we going to see some Trent Grisham, and do we care for our fantasy teams?
Yeah, I'll see some Trent Grisham. Not really that excited unless it's like a really deep league. Maybe if you're playing on NFBC, something like that with 5 outfielders, and it's a short week and the Yankees are on the road in a hitter-friendly park, and Grisham's, you're seeing his playing time ramp up maybe as a streamer, but beyond that, nothing really exciting there. Maybe, Rice has more of a spot in the lineup as well, but it's disappointing because I was high on Stanton coming into the year, and he was performing pretty well, and hopefully he's not out too long.
Yeah, I guess any time you draft Giancarlo Stanton, what you hope for is that he is performing pretty well, and then he's hopefully not out too long. I think that sounds exactly like the Giancarlo Stanton experience. You've gotten what you could have hoped for to this point, and maybe you'll only miss a few weeks and you'll get some more of this.
He didn't totally destroy your average, like a sub 200. So, I was happy with what he gave me. Yeah, rock solid.
Yeah, you mentioned Ben Rice in there. Already did have a path to playing time at first base, but with one more DH type out of the picture, that creates more configurations where the Yankees can get Rice in the lineup, maybe at DH, maybe DJ LeMahieu at first, Oswaldo Cabrera or Oswald Peraza at third, something like that. So certainly could be some small benefit to Rice as well. We also got, thanks to this commenter in the chat, David Bednar was placed on the IL, I think, mere minutes before we went live here. So I did not throw it on the outline for you there, Frank. But not good news for David Bednar. He was not available yesterday due to left side tightness. So I assume the move to the IL is related to that. Time to place some real bids on Aroldis Chapman everywhere that he's available. It seems pretty straightforward. Next man up here.
Yeah, you always love it when a team has a clear hierarchy and you know right away who the replacement closer will be, and definitely go pick up Aroldis Chapman. Obviously the K rate is super high, and maybe could run with the job rest of the way. And honestly, I'm gonna go do that right now in some of my leagues and pick up Aroldis Chapman.
Yeah, any time that you have those first come first serve leagues, go now. Yeah, I'll go ramble for a minute while you can place those bids. Colin Holderman, I guess, also in the picture, has a great ERA, 0.68. Could theoretically also be in the picture, but I would imagine Aroldis Chapman, you don't sign that guy unless you're going to turn over the ninth inning to him when you need to. He is still striking out a ton of batters. He's walking more than 1 out of every 5 batters, so there's some chance that Chapman gets the job and pitches his way out of it, but I think you got to go pick him up if he is available. One final bit of injury news. Braxton Garrett, talked about this yesterday with Ryan on the Saturday podcast. Looked like he was potentially heading to the IL. He is now definitely heading to the IL with a flexor strain. That tends to be not a good one, so we could probably be without Braxton Garrett for quite some time, even if we don't have an exact timeline yet. Could be one of those where it's an obvious drop, given that he's not a super high ceiling guy, even when things are going well. And the takeaway here is the same as it's been all year in the Marlins rotation. It should be Max Meyer, but is it actually going to be Max Meyer? Who knows?
Honestly, I feel like it has to be at this point. Like, now there's a clear spot. I know today they called up, what's his name there, Kyle Tyler to fill in, but that feels like a short-term fill-in, and then they could bring in Max Meyer, hopefully. I have him stashed in one of my leagues, so I'm hoping for that.
Yeah, as mentioned in the chat here, they might be trying to get even more years of control. I don't know where the exact deadline is, but if they're
good info,
I can imagine if they're coming up on that deadline, if they're just 2 weeks away and they can lose 2 more games to steal an extra year of control for Max Meyer, there's nothing stopping them from losing 2 more games at this point and increasing their chances of getting the number 1 overall pick. That'll do it for the headline portion of today's show. So let's move on to the main topic today. We're going to be talking about the bubble teams. There's a whole bunch of them still, even though we're just about a month out from the trade deadline, a little more than that. Probably something to do with the fact that we now see 12 playoff teams, 6 teams in each league. I think that's leading teams to enter the season just shooting for 85 wins. And then if they're looking good, they'll buy. And if they're looking bad, they'll sell.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, look at last year with the D-backs getting to the World Series. I mean, all you got to do is make the playoffs, and who knows what can happen. So I think if I were an MLB GM and we're in the mix, like some of these teams, like the Royals, the Twins, why not make an ad here or there? Nothing crazy, but something to solidify your roster and just go for it, because anyone could win in the playoffs.
Yeah, so we'd like to see most of these teams be buyers, like you said, just try to get just barely over the line and make a run like last year's Diamondbacks. But some of them are definitely going to sell. And the fact that there are so few obvious sellers means that any of these teams who do choose to bail will be finding themselves in probably a seller's market. So that probably, I don't know if that is even one of the factors for why you think your Blue Jays are going to sell, or if you think they're just going to sell anyway because it's just not working. So why don't you tell me a little bit about that? How is there any hope that the Blue Jays go on any run and become buyers, or is this just over?
I just really think we haven't seen improvements from this offense, and there's just so many. There's such a glut of teams fighting for those wild card spots. I think they'd be wise to trade Yusei Kikuchi and Danny Jansen just because they're pending free agents after the season, and they'll have nice value. You can get a decent return, especially like you said, in what should be a seller's market. Yusei Kikuchi's performed very well. Danny Jansen's hit well. I mean, I'd like them to re-sign them, but I feel like each of these players, they could command a hefty price. The Jays got to re-sign, hopefully re-sign Vlad Jr. and Bichette. So it'd be a good time to cash in on Kikuchi and Danny Jansen. And if they do so, that could open up maybe a spot for, Yariel Rodriguez to continue starting, or Ricky Tiedemann down the stretch. He just came back in the minors, yet he looked good in a rehab assignment yesterday or a couple days ago at Single A. And, I know the team is super cautious with their prospects, but you got to think if they've made a trade like selling off Yusei Kikuchi, they'd give him Tiedemann, that is, a chance maybe in August and onward, and that could be exciting.
Yeah, that could be some rare positivity for the Jays this year. He's definitely a name that fantasy players have gotten familiar with, hoping that he will arrive over the last 15 months or so. Maybe we will finally get to see him. And I guess if the team trades Danny Jansen, the fantasy implications there are obvious. A little bit more playing time for Alejandro Kirk. Whether or not that's something you want to get involved with at this point, I guess, is an open question. I just checked his batting average is down to 195. Is that
it's not good. Yeah, not good. And I know Blue Jays fans listening would be like, why would we trade Danny Jansen? What is Frank saying? But it's really just trying to recoup some assets in terms of prospects, cashing in on Danny Jansen when he's at his peak value. And, the team really doesn't seem to be, going anywhere this year, like we've mentioned. So why not try to bolster the farm system by trading Danny Jansen, who's a free agent anyway after the year? It's not to say that I'm this endorser of Alejandro Kirk, although I do think, he could perform better. I feel like, what we saw 2 years ago, I can't shake the optimism that maybe he can recreate that Alejandro Kirk, that is. But yeah, in short, I think it would be wise for them to move on from Danny Jansen.
Yeah, anyone with Kirk's bat to ball skills, I don't want to give up on, although I guess it's worth pointing out that he is striking out more this year, 14% up from about 11% in the last few years. So there's been real things, not just bad luck there, but maybe in the second half, he'll become an interesting fantasy option again. There was a question from PJ in chat, which is a question that I have as well, but I'll let them ask it. You think Toronto is going to try Nate Pearson at closer? I could see a world where Chad Green gets dealt at the deadline and Jimmy Garcia and Jordan Romano are still hurt or maybe healthy and traded. Is this at all reasonable, or is this only something that people who remember Nate Pearson from when he was a prospect and haven't watched him pitch in middle relief the last couple seasons would think?
I like this call quite a bit. Like you said, they'll probably go to, like, Chad Green first, and then they can easily trade Chad Green as well at the deadline, and then just embrace a youth movement. Let Nate Pearson try a closer. What if he thrives? Then all of a sudden his value, if you want to trade him down the road, it increases quite a bit. So I think yes, I would say yes. I do think the Jays will try Nate Pearson at closer following the trade deadline, August onward.
I like to hear it. He's somebody I've speculated on in very deep leagues, but nothing more than that at this point. But, a former top prospect getting a potential opportunity, it is a career path that you've seen before. Wouldn't be too surprised. One last thing on the Blue Jays before we move south of the border. You mentioned just quickly that you don't think that Vlad Jr. is being traded. I think that fan bases on other teams have started, casting their eyes towards some of the biggest stars on the Blue Jays, like Vlad Jr., thinking that, hey, if the Blue Jays fall out, we could get a game-changing piece here. Is the noise from up in Canada that that's actually a potential plan for the Blue Jays, or is the team talking like there's no chance, the worst that's going to happen is a reset, we're still building around Vlad?
Well, I feel there's definitely frustration around Vlad in that he's not developed to the hitter we expected earlier on, we as fans, or any baseball observers. But I wouldn't put it at no chance that the Jays trade him, just because I don't really trust this front office much at all. And I wouldn't put it past them doing so, trading Vlad. I just feel like they should give him another year for sure, Vlad, that is. He seems like the type of hitter that if he goes to the right team, they can unlock him more, and you'll start seeing him finally tap into that power that we've been anxiously wanting, rather than all these ground balls. And yeah, I could just see it. If they trade Vlad, he's going to go on to just hit 40 home runs a year, and it's going to really make Blue Jays fans pull out their hair.
Yeah, I mean, just referencing what you were talking about earlier, how you'd love to see the team's front office and everything change. It sounds like if you're a Blue Jays fan, what you wish would happen is that the right team comes to Vlad and gets the most out of him rather than having to send him away to the right team. But unless the Blue Jays are going to pull off some entire front office and coaching staff trade at the deadline, seems unlikely.
Yeah, we'll have to wait. If we want the fans like me who want changes from the top, probably will have to wait to the off season if that were to be the case.
Yeah, so well, maybe then there's some silver lining to the team crashing and burning. Maybe that will accelerate those plans at least. We'll move on to the rest of the American League bubble right after this message from Pick Six. Did you ever play the over-under game with your friends? Think I can eat that slice of pizza in under 30 seconds? Or I know it'll take you over a minute to down that 2-liter. If you have, then you're going to love Pick Six, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Here's how to play during baseball season. Pick between 2 and 6 players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat, like runs, hits, strikeouts, and more. Track your picks and play against others for a shot to win huge cash prizes. That's all there is to it. Download the new DraftKings Pick Six app and use code RWPicks. New customers play $5 and get 50 in Pick Six credits. That's code RWPicks for new customers to play $5 and get 50 in Pick Six credits. Only on DraftKings Pick Six. The crown is yours. 1 per new customer. Non-withdrawable Pick Six credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 18 plus in most eligible states. Not available in all states, including New York and Connecticut. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See terms at picksix.draftkings.com/promos. Welcome back to the Sunday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Erik Halterman here with my guest, Frank Ammirante, and we've been going over the bubble teams. Will they buy? Will they sell? And what sort of opportunities might that open up for your fantasy team? We talked about Frank's Blue Jays, and we're both pretty sure that they are destined to sell. How about the Tigers, who are currently tied with the Blue Jays at 35 and 41, and don't have to chase down the Orioles if they were to have any, or the Orioles and Yankees, if they were to have any sort of division aspirations, although the Guardians are tough to chase down as well. So I would imagine Tigers just stuck in the same wild card mix. Any hope that they are going to buy, or do you think they're likely to sell?
This one was actually one of the more difficult teams for me looking at the group we have here of bubble teams. I don't think they'll necessarily really sell because they have a lot of young players, but they do definitely need help on offense. So if they were to make a move to add to the team, they gotta maybe add a veteran bat. Maybe they can look to Josh Bell from the Marlins, someone like that, because they just been ice cold at the plate. The Tigers have, but on the other hand, they can just look at it as okay. Maybe Spencer Torkelson starts getting going in the minors, and then we can bring him back up. And maybe Torkelson has a second half hot streak like he did last year, and that could be sort of their deadline addition in a way. This is a team that is young, and they don't really need to be reckless here, I don't think. On the other hand, they could completely, cash in on Jack Flaherty pitching like an ace. That could reel in quite a return, but I don't think they'll do that, but that could be an interesting way of looking at the Tigers as well.
Yeah, I think that would be the big question, right? It's just a 1-year deal that Flaherty's on with the Tigers. If we remember just how bad things looked for him just 1 year ago or just 6 months ago, he looked like he was pitching his way towards the bullpen or towards the injured list. And now he's looking like one of the best pitchers in baseball. I would imagine if the Tigers are not in striking distance a month from now, they have to trade him, right? And they could get quite a big return if he's still healthy, of course.
Yeah, it would be the smart move, especially because, they got such a great pitching coach that just really seems to tap into more value of their pitchers, really help them unlock more. So the fact that they have that within their organization, they can afford to maybe move on from Flaherty and really cash in. And then that could, if we're talking about who that could help out, maybe cements a spot for Matt Manning, although he hasn't really, looked that great. I got to see what about Sawyer Gibson? Is he still, I haven't checked. Is he still banged up? I know people were excited about him coming into the year as like a deep league arm.
Yeah, it was Tommy John surgery.
Oh no, he got Tommy John a while ago. Yeah, I'm so sorry. But like
so not
Jackson Jobe could be maybe they give him a chance. One of the top pitching prospects, in September. My bad on that whiff about I completely forgot he had Tommy John, Sawyer Gibson.
Well, that explains why you haven't heard about him in a couple months. That would add up. Jackson Jobe, though, the other top pitching prospect, a much higher rated pitching prospect for the Tigers, is currently out with a hamstring strain in the minors, but he is, I think, on a rehab assignment or about to begin one, or just has made one rehab start at a lower level of the minors, is what it looks like. So certainly could see some opportunities for him. I mean, if the Tigers are actually in it, and then they might look to him for help down the stretch, he would be certainly a second half name to know. If they do sell, though, beyond Flaherty, there's not a lot of veteran talent. This is a team that's ready to compete this year or next year, or really actually probably 2 years ago. So they should be in adding mode. It's just I'm not sure if their record is going to demand that they add a month from now.
It's a shame for the Tigers that Kenta Maeda really hasn't done enough to make himself as a veteran piece to move at the deadline. Maybe if he strings a couple of starts together, Maeda could be a cheaper piece they could move. Maybe the Padres could look to get him. They need some help at the back end of that rotation. That could be an option as well.
How about we move on to the next team, who are only one game ahead of the Tigers and the Blue Jays in the standings, even though they won the World Series last year. Turns out that doesn't give you any credit in the regular season the following year. The Texas Rangers, they're 36-40. By their record, they're at real risk of becoming a seller, 5 games out of the final wildcard spot. But man, this is a team that's been adding pieces for a few years and again, just won the World Series. I can't see them selling. Can you?
No, I can't see them selling the Rangers. Max Scherzer's back today, so that could be looked at for them as sort of a quote deadline addition. I feel like this is a year where the Rangers would be wise to stand pat and not really make any kind of aggressive move like last year, because Scherzer's back and they're still within striking distance. When the team's healthy, they're still quite good. So I feel like it's a good year for them to stand pat.
Yeah, I'm not expecting anything major. They could also just, it's not just Max Scherzer. They're just waiting on Jacob deGrom to get back too.
Another one.
Talk about deadline additions. I mean, probably not going to be till a little bit after that. And Tyler Mahle, actually. So they have 3 of their 5 starting pitchers. 3 of their best 5 are coming back this week. Actually, I don't even know if it's 3 of their best 5 because they go 6 deep maybe when everyone's healthy. Now, Mahle is ahead of 3 of their starting 5 when everybody's healthy are back this week. That looks like a team that's just going to ride that renewed health and maybe add some small pieces, but I'm not seeing anybody who I see as at risk of losing a spot. I think they'll, even in the outfield, for example, just wait until Evan Carter gets healthy. So I'd imagine a fairly quiet deadline there, if anything. What about elsewhere in Texas, the Houston Astros? They are 4.5 games out of the final spot. They're sitting at 37 and 40. It would be weird to see the Astros sell, but with so many injuries, it's also kind of hard to see them going on a run and looking like obvious buyers. Which side of the fence would you have them on?
For me, I feel like the Astros will be like soft buyers, not a big splash, because they're starting to pick it up. They've won 4 in a row, 5 of their last 6. They're trying to sweep the Orioles today. So, and Kyle Tucker should be back soon. I think what the Astros should do and what they will do is maybe add a veteran bat. Another one that makes sense is Josh. There's another good landing spot for Josh Bell. Jose Abreu, of course, was released, and they have a glaring hole at first base. That would block Joey Loperfido, but he's kind of really not shown enough to really trust. If the Astros try to make a splash, maybe they can get Eric Fedde and then do a package, Eric Fedde and Andrew Vaughn from the White Sox, although maybe it'd be less likely the White Sox trade Vaughn, even though he hasn't really lived up to the hype at all. So that would address a need for the Astros. I do think they'll be aggressive. They're much better than what their record is. We're starting to see that, and I think they'll be right in the mix.
Yeah, Fedde is a good name to mention. I'm sure he's going to end up on one of these bubble teams, if not one of the clear contenders who we're leaving out of today's show because we know they're all going to be buyers. Fedde signed to a cheap deal. It was a 2-year, $15 million deal, so he'll be under contract for $7.5 million next year as well. And the way he's pitching, that's definitely added value. You could get a solid, maybe a number 4 starter in your playoff rotation, something like that for this year and next. Way he's been pitching, maybe even more than that, but I wouldn't get greedy. It would make sense to add him, although we should point out this is another team that is getting some injured starters back in theory. Luis Garcia and Lance McCullers have projected return dates around the trade deadline, maybe a little bit after, so the team could just say, yeah, we're getting our pitchers back. We'll add 1 first base bat, like you said.
Yeah.
So I guess John Singleton, we are not confident in him holding his fantasy value, whatever it even is at this point.
Yeah, it just feels like the Astros would be wise to add a veteran who's just has somewhat of a track record. I mean, Josh Bell fits in perfectly. It's not like he'd cost a lot either.
Yeah, I think that would make some sense for them. How about let's move to the Rays, who are sitting tied with the Astros at 37 and 40, 4.5 games back. A team that usually overperforms the projections and would have had plenty of people picking them to win the division just because they tend to do that, even if they don't look like the best team on paper. This year, they're underperforming the projections. And do you think that this will be a chance for them to do a little reset, or do you think that the Rays will keep buying and try to make it every single season?
This is the perfect opportunity for the Rays to clear that log jam in the infield, maybe trade Brandon Lau, trade Ahmed Rosario. Basically what I want them to do and what I think they should do, and honestly they probably will do it, is open up a spot for Junior Caminero. I know he's hurt, but he's coming back soon. You can make this move end of July and then let Caminero play every day August till the end of the season. It makes the most sense. They're fighting, like, I know a lot of these teams are close in the wild card race, but there's so many teams ahead of you or right next to you that it's tough to, pass all of them. And it's just the perfect time for the Rays to clear that infield log jam for sure.
And we know with the Rays that the non-prospects they get back in the deal will turn out to be just as good as the players they trade away just 1 year later. So, yeah, could definitely see them moving some infielders, some pitchers. Their starting rotation is potentially crowded when it gets healthy. Jeffrey Springs when he comes back, for example. Shane Baz when they just decide to invite him back to the major league roster. Could maybe see the team trading a Aaron Savali or Zach Eflin or Zach Littell, something like that.
Yeah, that's a good call out too, for sure. Because yeah, it's definitely crowded. And then all of a sudden, but just imagine if they kept all those going into next season, it'd be like, wow, look at the pitching depth on this team. Like, so
Yeah.
I don't, but maybe Zach Littell, because he's, they traded for Aaron Savali last year. I don't know. Maybe it'd be tough for me to see them move him. But like you said, it does make sense. They've got a crowded rotation with everyone coming back.
I would predict at least one confusing sideways deal that ends up making the team much better, but I don't know what it'll look like. Let's stick in the AL East. The Boston Red Sox, they are currently sitting 41-36, which is good enough for half a game out of the final wild card spot. This looked like it was going to be a transition year for the Red Sox, where they were not necessarily a favorite to make the playoffs, but not a team that looked like they had no chance, and they've, I'd say, outperformed those expectations, but not by a ton, not to the point that they're obviously good. So which direction do you see them going?
I think the Red Sox will stay the course and be patient, because they know they got young prospects coming up like Roman Anthony and the rest down the road. So I don't think they'll do something too aggressively. I think Boston, even though they're right in the mix, I mean, it makes sense to I know we've said it all offseason, but to trade Kenley Jansen and try to get something for him, you could just slot in Justin Slayton as a new closer, and that would be great for fantasy. He's been a good reliever. So I think that makes a lot of sense for Boston. I don't really see them adding. I feel like they'll be patient.
Yeah, 40 strikeouts against just 6 walks in 37 2/3 innings for Slayton would be an interesting name to know in the second half. I think that if they are still in similar position, half a game out, can't see them trading Kenley Jansen.
Tough,
But if they fall, if they go on a slump these next couple of weeks, I think Jansen becomes one of the most obvious relievers on the market. And in that case, certainly Slayton, the name to know, maybe to pick up now. It's just, tough to justify that move if they're sitting where they are now.
Yeah, the fans would definitely be angry at that if they were to do so. But I feel it does make sense for me because, you can get – it is the time to trade Kenley Jansen. How many more seasons does he have left putting up this value? Get something for him.
Yeah, I can definitely see it. We'll see if the circumstances allow them to do it. Moving to the top of the bubble, the Minnesota Twins might be unfair to call them a bubble team, but I think it still is where they are right now. They're 42-35. They're the 5th seed, so we're going slightly out of order here. They're half a game ahead of the Royals, who are the 6th seed. In turn, the Royals are half a game ahead of the Red Sox. So Twins, they're safe, but barely safe. They thought they would be much safer in their division. I think it looked like the Twins were the only real contender in the AL Central, and that maybe one of the other two teams would make a run. But in fact, the Guardians have done much more than made a run. They've been far better than the Twins this season, putting the Twins in this bubble. I would certainly lean Bayer, though. How about you?
Yeah, I definitely lean Bayer with the Twins. They're starting to round into form. They've won 9 of their last 13 games. Royce Lewis is back and hitting home runs like seemingly every day. The Twins would be wise to add to maybe their offense. Maybe they could be another fit for Josh Bell, or maybe they can add in a Kevin Pillar, help them against lefties, or a Miguel Andujar, who's performing pretty well with the A's. He'd be a cheap addition. Basically, I would say the Twins, like a cheap move to help the offense out. And who could that take playing time away from? Maybe Carlos Santana. I was going to say Jose Miranda, but he's played pretty well. I mean, they should let him continue to play. So, but they do need some kind of boost to the offense to some degree, I would say.
Yeah, that's the tough thing with reading the Twins is that their offense is just full of players who are pretty good. Not anything special, but pretty good when things are going well. I mean, Carlos Santana, even him, when things are going well, he's a slightly above average hitter. Nothing special, but he's pretty good. Jose Miranda, he's pretty good. A bunch of these left-handed outfielders, when things are going right for Trevor Larnach and Max Kepler and Al Kirilov and even Matt Wallner last year, not this year. All of those guys, when things are going well, they're pretty good. And then when they're not, they're sent to the minors. It's just such a balanced team that really feels like if the manager deploys every player perfectly, things are going to be good. But if not so sure. There's some raziness to this lineup, I think, which makes it hard to pin down exactly how any move would affect the team.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. This was definitely one of the tougher teams to try to predict who they would trade for. I just feel like I would have to label them as buyers, the Twins, because like you said, we had preseason high expectations, and now they're starting to play well with Roy Lewis back. So it's tough to pin down who they'll trade for, but yeah, buyers to a small degree.
Yeah, and no obvious players to bump from the starting rotation, I don't think. And you're not going to bump John Duran from the closer spot. You might add a seventh inning guy or something. So there'll be moves, but maybe not ones that will affect things too much for our purposes. Then finally, to wrap up the AL, the Kansas City Royals, who are in 6th at 42-36. They are maybe the surprise team of the AL. Well, probably that's the Guardians, actually. We're just not talking about them today because they've advanced beyond the bubble. They will certainly not be selling. And I don't think the Royals will be selling either. It would take quite this slump the next 2 weeks. I think that they have had the first half they needed to have to take steps forward at the deadline. I think in contrast to the Tigers, I would have said either of those teams could have been in this spot right now, or they could be where the Tigers are, just either side of 500. Unless the Royals collapse hard in early July, they're adding, right? But where would they be adding?
Yeah, I will say that I think the Royals will be buyers, but it is worth noting that they've gone 3-10 in their last 13 games. Maybe that slump is starting, and if it continues by the time we get to the trade deadline, hey, maybe they surprise and become sellers. But as for now, I would say buyers. Maybe add a veteran bat. I was looking online. I saw John Heyman linked the Royals to Tommy Pham, who seems likely to be moved, given that he's a veteran, and the White Sox are just awful. So he could add a boost to the lineup, Tommy Pham to the Royals. Maybe the Royals can add an arm to the bullpen like Carlos Estevez from the Angels, which would worry me for James McArthur, although I think McArthur's better than Estevez. You never know. Like they might say Estevez has more I don't know. You never know with these closers. They might lean towards experience more than skills, or it becomes a committee. So that could be worth noting too if they look for bullpen help, the Royals.
Yeah, I think that the bullpen is probably the most obvious spot that I see in addition. And I think of all the possible contenders, I think this is probably the team with the weakest ninth inning answer. James McArthur just really has not been anything special this year. He hasn't been completely blown up, but this is not a closer for a contender, at least in my eyes. He's got just a 20% strikeout rate, a 4.85 ERA, 1.48 WHIP. He does have 12 saves. Yeah,
he started so good, and then he had those blow-ups, and it just hasn't been great ever since.
So I think this is a team where if you look at some of the weakest relievers who get traded at the deadline, but who still might have a chance to close, maybe like a Kyle Finnegan or a Carlos Estevez, even those guys could close, I think, for the Royals. You mentioned adding an outfielder. Is there risk to say MJ Melendez could be losing more playing time? And given that he's hitting 178 with a 604 OPS, probably for the best.
Yeah, that could perhaps be a player, even though a lot of people had high hopes for Melendez. Maybe even like Hunter Renfroe loses playing time or something like that. But they should add a bat. But I want to interrupt with one quick thing I just saw. The Yankees just made a trade bringing in JD Davis from the A's. So that goes back to what we were saying of the injury to Stanton. Now that could JD Davis could get some of those at bats and block someone like maybe if Ben Rice struggles, or take away from that Trent Grisham conversation we had.
Which is probably fine. That's an interesting move. Looks like they deal JD Davis for Jordan Groshans, appears to be the trade. JD Davis and cash. Cash going from Oakland to the Yankees? That's weird. But JD Davis has not hit particularly well this season. A 670 OPS in 39 games, just 4 homers. But under the hood, looks like he's actually striking out just 22% of the time. That's his best mark in 5 years. And his hard hit numbers, barrel rate seems to be right in line with what he normally does. So JD Davis, if he gets some actual at-bats in New York, maybe.
Hey,
At least as a, yeah.
What if he's like Matt Carpenter was for the Yankees, that little run out of nowhere, he just started hitting all these home runs. Hey, you never know. So worth mentioning.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked. I liked JD Davis when he was sent to Oakland this offseason or right before the start of the season. I thought that he had enough power to make it work. Hasn't happened so far, but might happen with the Yankees. We will move over to the National League bubble teams right after this message from Home Run Forecast. Can certain weather conditions lead to more home runs? The atmosphere can affect how far a baseball flies by 20%. Home Run Forecast measures the weather conditions at a ballpark to tell us if the atmosphere is good or bad for ball flight during a game. An index value that rates the air is created for each game and ballpark and is displayed on a scale from 1 to 10. Home Run Forecast Premium site offers index values by the hour for each game, 24-hour forecast, wind direction and speed, and even whether the roof will be open at certain stadiums. Home Run Forecast is offering a special for the start of the baseball season. You can get access to the premium site for the entire season for only $28, a savings of nearly 30%. Go to homerunforecast.com/RotoWire now to sign up. Welcome back to the Sunday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Pick 6. Erik Halterman and Frank Ammirante here going over the bubble teams. Are they buyers? Are they sellers? How will that affect your fantasy team? Let's move to the NL, where I think the entire league is on the bubble pretty much. Does that seem right to you? Everybody but the Rockies and Marlins have a shot at the playoffs this year. And not just have a shot, everybody else is at worst 3 games out.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So at the very bottom of that mess sits the San Francisco Giants. And it's probably worth pointing out that even though the Giants are only 3 games out, there are 6 teams between them and the final playoff spot. So they only need to play 3 games better than the Padres and Cardinals the rest of the way to make it in. But they'll also have to outplay 6 other teams. So does that push the Giants more likely to sell to you?
I think the Giants seem like a really, really soft buyer, like a cheap veteran, like a Paul DeJong to bring in as a shortstop, and that could potentially block them from calling up Marco Luciano eventually, because they need a veteran there. They need help at shortstop, and the Giants, given what they did the offseason, Blake Snell, Jorge Soler, Matt Chapman, maybe they fancy their chances to stay in the race. I'm watching too much soccer. I did like a British kind of talk there, English. But yeah, fancy their chances. Yeah, I think the Giants will stay the course in terms of not really sell, but a little soft ad like Paul DeJong makes sense.
Yeah, I think that could make some sense. I think thinking about the team's recent trajectory, they certainly have been adding pieces like they're going to contend soon. So I just don't see a world in which they trade, their big pitchers. You're not going to trade Blake Snell after he gets healthy or something like that. You're going to wait until he gets healthy, wait until Robbie Ray gets healthy, for example, and so maybe add small pieces. And if they did blow up and decide to sell at the deadline, I just don't know if they're going to get much from moving the veteran bats like a Michael Conforto or Mike Yastrzemski or Jorge Soler. I guess they probably would, but they wouldn't get a ton. And the players that would get playing time, I guess it could be this is a Luis Matos route to playing time if the Giants do fall out of it and move 1 or 2 of those outfielders.
Yeah, that could be an option for sure. Even though the Giants are on a 4-game losing streak right now, I feel like, given what we're saying, they feel like a team that can start to get going as they get healthier and go on a real hot streak down the stretch. They're definitely better than their record. They've been hurt by injuries, and Blake Snell hasn't performed to expectations when he was on the mound. I think the Giants will get going, to be honest, and it's gonna be a soft buy.
Yeah, I could see it. How about the next team on the list, the Cincinnati Reds? They're sitting 36-40, 2.5 games out. A team that certainly is heading in the right direction over the course of multiple years here. They've gathered a good amount of young talent, but dealing with too many injuries and suspensions to that young talent without Matt McLain for the whole year so far. Christian Encarnacion Strand is going to wind up missing most of the season as well. Noelvi Marte about to come back from his PED suspension, but he's been out to this point. So it hasn't really been the fully activated, exciting young juggernaut here. Do you think the team will try to make any sort of push or just wait and try to compete in 2025?
I think they're just going to stay the course and be patient, similar to the Red Sox that we spoke about, and that, the Reds can, in their sense, they can look at Noelvi Marte's return as a deadline addition, and then maybe if Matt McLean can come back in September or August, that could be another boost to the lineup. So, the Reds have played better lately. Even though 4-6 in their last 10, they did go on a 6-game winning streak prior to that. So staying the course feels like the right move. I know it's not exciting to discuss, but it really feels like the most likely outcome.
Yeah, and they don't really even have that many veterans that they would peel off at the deadline. The sort of players that you said, well, we wanted them on the roster because we thought we were competing this year, but we're not. We'll get another interchangeable veteran next year. I mean, that's a Nick Martinez or something like that, but there's no real pieces here. I don't think the Jonathan India trade talks that was not really coming from inside Cincinnati. It was coming from the rest of the league, hoping that they could peel off a piece from Cincinnati. Don't think that the Reds would move him if they fall out of it. I would think that they're viewing him as part of the future at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Just staying the course makes sense for the Reds here, and that's all I see. Unless Alexis Diaz struggles and they gotta add there. Alexis Diaz hasn't been great. And, we haven't mentioned, but Tanner Scott could be moved from the Marlins, and he's been quite good. So that could be an option as well. But that feels aggressive for where the Reds are in the standings.
Yeah, I think if the Reds made a move while Alexis Diaz struggled, kind of hard to see that happening. If they're making a move, it's probably because he's pitching well and shutting the opposing teams down in the ninth inning. But if they manage to make a move while Diaz is still shaky, that would probably be where the ad could be. I'm right there with you on that. New York Mets, that's a tough one to figure out for me. Heading into the year, didn't really look like they were trying to compete, but also they have all the money in the world, and they're very much in the mix after a recent run. They're sitting 36-39, only 2 games out. If you're sitting there with Steve Cohen's resources and you have a shot to make the playoffs, it would be pretty hard for me to say you should burn it all down, even if you didn't think that you were going to be that good this year. But which direction do you think the Mets are going to go?
So I read a report, and it makes perfect sense in that the Mets are looking to trade some of their veteran starters like Sean Manaea, Jose Quintana, Luis Severino maybe, because Quintana and Severino are free agents after the year, and Manaea has a player option that he can decline. So they can flip these veterans, and then Cody Senga's coming back eventually, you hope, and it could open up a spot for Christian Scott as well, who's held his own when he's been in the big leagues, and he's just done everything that needs to be done in the minors. So he's got to be with the team. So I feel like at least one of those arms I mentioned, Manaea, Quintana, Severino, will be traded. I don't see them making a splash like trading Pete Alonso. The Mets are playing well now. They can make the playoffs. But definitely makes so much sense for them to trade, especially like Quintana, someone like that. Because I feel like Severino would be the one you would want to maybe hold on to, because maybe you always have hope he can refine that previous form. So I see Quintana or Manaea especially moved.
Yeah, certainly if the Mets slip at all, I think definitely they will be selling those guys. And if they don't, it's going to be interesting because it's hard to move any starters if you think you are in the playoff hunt. But those guys you could afford to move because you've got, as you mentioned, Christian Scott coming up. Pete Alonso will be the interesting one here, though. If the Mets were going to sell, Pete Alonso, I think, would have to be on the market. He's expiring this winter. This is your chance to get anything back for him. So in some ways, it's a worst case scenario for the Mets if they are just enough in it that they can't justify trading Pete Alonso, but they're not in it enough to actually make it. That might be the worst case scenario if you're Steve Cohen.
Yeah, that's true. Because in the moment right now, it's hard to trade Pete Alonso. They're just on this nice run. But like you said, he is expiring. I mean, what I meant when I was saying is if I'm going to predict it, I'd say they don't trade him. But if I were the GM, it does make perfect sense to trade Pete Alonso and try to see what you can get. because it doesn't really. Do you think? I don't know. It doesn't seem like they're going to re-sign him.
Yeah, it's a tough one because he's going to want a ton of money because of the way he's performed up to this point and because of how much wealth the Mets have broadcast that they have. He has every right to say, look, I deserve my share of that. I'm one of the leaders of this team. But because the way MLB free agency works, he's going to hit free agency at his age 30 season, and he's going to try to get paid for his 30s based on his production in his 20s. And he's going to want to be paid like a star. And teams are going to wonder, hey, if your bat falls off a little bit in your early 30s and then a lot in your mid 30s, I don't know how much money we want to spend on a first base only kind of guy. So I could see him being someone who takes a while to sign this offseason just because it might be hard to convince teams to match his number.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. And maybe it makes it less likely that the Mets trade Alonso because it's not like he's had that great of he's had a poor year by his standards. So maybe if he was like doing his usual production, his value is that like teams may be hesitant to trade for Alonso. I mean, he's not performing to expectation. So that makes me think also that Alonso will remain a Met after the deadline.
Yeah, fair enough. I think I'd probably lean that way too. But if the Mets go, 2-12 over the next 2 weeks, maybe we'll reconsider. The next team here, the Chicago Cubs, they're 37-40. They're sitting 2 games out of a wild card spot. Certainly had designs to be competing this year. The bullpen is just an absolute mess, though, with Albert Alzolay getting injured. Hector Neris is not exactly stepping up. Team could really use help in the pen if they're still competing, or are the Cubs just going to be out of it in 2 or 3 weeks and they're not going to be adding any pieces at all?
I'd predict the Cubs are buyers. They can get Tanner Scott, like we mentioned, from the Marlins to help out that bullpen. That makes a ton of sense, really. And he just slots in at closer. Also, they have a glaring hole at catcher. Maybe they trade for Danny Jansen from the Jays if the Jays look to do that. Or the Cubs could go get Elias Diaz from the Rockies, who I've read has been mentioned as a potential player to be traded at the deadline. But like you said, the bullpen needs help, and that makes a ton of sense bringing in a new closer. Like Hector Neris, I know I was happy to pick him up really cheap in my NFBC leagues, but like he's not a closer at this stage of his career. They need an upgrade there.
Yeah, 4.55 ERA, 166 WHIP for Neris, 26 strikeouts against 21 walks in 27 2/3 innings. So this is another one of those teams like the Royals where just about any reliever that gets traded at the deadline could see saves in Chicago. I would not be expecting to see many saves in the second half from Hector Neris if you happen to have him. Let's go to the next team on the list here. That would be, the Washington Nationals. I guess we should mention them. They're 37-39. They're only a game and a half out of the final wildcard spot. I don't think that they're buyers, but I guess what if they go 6-2? What if they go 10-5 over the next couple of weeks? I mean, is there any world in which you see them adding, or do you think even if they get hot and are sitting 6th in a month, they're going to wait it out?
The Nationals have been a surprise. You wouldn't have think they'd be this close to it, and what a job they've done with their pitching staff. Like Mitchell Parker's performed above expectations, Jake Irvin as well, even lately DJ Hers. And of course, Mackenzie Gore is breaking out. I think for them, the best move is like cashing in on Jesse Winker. He's played great, but like this is where you can get an asset for. I feel like from here till the deadline, they'll start to fall a bit, and then we'll end up seeing them trade one of those veterans because this makes too much sense. Like Winker or Eddie Rosario, with all these teams needing some kind of veteran help on offense that we even mentioned earlier in this episode, it would make sense for the Nationals to do that. But what a surprise so far.
Yeah, the Nationals did add just a ton of decent-ish bats over the winter in Jesse Winker, Eddie Rosario, Joey Gallo, just kind of hoping that enough of them would stick and you'd be able to swap some of them at the deadline, I imagine was the plan, and it seems like that's going to happen. This is another team where maybe the worst-case scenario for their long-term future is that they do still look like they're in it a month from now because, I don't know, even if they add a couple decent pieces and they're sitting tied for the
Yeah.
final wild card spot on the deadline day, I don't see this roster having the staying power, as impressive as it's been, that they're sitting near 500. So it's probably best for their long-term future if they have a difficult next couple weeks here, make it obvious that they're sellers. But I don't know. I think that they're probably smart enough to recognize that, and they're not going to jeopardize the future.
Open up a spot for James Wood and see what he can do. Give him some reps. Makes the most sense for them.
True. Although I guess maybe there's your one scenario where they don't become sellers, is they say, wait a second, we've got James Wood here. He's going to lead us all the way to the playoffs. I doubt it, but we'll see. A couple more NL bubble teams. The Pittsburgh Pirates are sitting on the same record, 37-39, game and a half out of the final wild card spot. Another young team, maybe kind of similar to the Tigers and Royals in the AL, where they've been building towards being competitive for a few years now. Haven't really had the staying power in the previous seasons, and maybe they will this year. Now they've got that Paul Skeens guy leading the rotation. That'll help. Do you think they have enough that they're going to decide to add pieces, or is this another team that should maybe wait a year?
I think the Pirates will wait a year, but if they do continue to play well and they want to add to the offense, maybe bring I keep mentioning him, but it makes sense here too. A reunion with Josh Bell could make sense because, like Rowdy Tellez has not been it. Pirates need help on offense. Could even add a catcher like I mentioned, Danny Jansen or Elias Diaz. That would make sense because Henry Davis has been hurt and he hasn't really done it. And Yasmani Grandal, he's more of a backup at this stage of his career, so they can get help there, the Pirates. But in terms of a prediction, I say they stay the course, really.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think if they're still sitting within a couple games, a minor addition, perhaps, just a bat, like you said. First base is definitely a hole. If Rowdy Tellez is sitting at the top of the depth chart and his OPS starts with a 5, you're not really a contender. Also, we mentioned the David Bednar injury that happened earlier. He is on the IL with a strained left oblique. If that turns out to be a longer-term thing and they're still competing, they're going to need to add in the bullpen. But it could be the case that helps send them towards a sell. And maybe if they do sell Aroldis Chapman, I think would be very obviously. If the Pirates are moving anybody at all, he's gone.
Oh, absolutely. That makes perfect sense that he'd be moving. Chapman maybe could go help out the Royals. We mentioned them needing bullpen help. Or the Cubs reunion in Chicago.
He could be, I think it would be a reunion basically wherever he goes at this point.
Yeah, it's true.
A couple more bubble teams. The Arizona Diamondbacks, they're 38-39. They are sitting one game out of the final wild card spot. And having just made it to the World Series last year, you'd imagine they'd be predisposed towards buying, although they were probably playing above their heads last season. Any hope, any chance that this is anything other than a modest buy?
Feels like a stay the course because Zach Gallen eventually coming back, Eduardo Rodriguez eventually coming back. I have to check Merrill Kelly's. I know he's out really long, but they have so many injuries that could be like their deadline addition, similar to the Giants pitching staff with getting Robbie Ray back. The D-backs may want to stay the course unless I've seen some tweets. Maybe they move one of those starters that I mentioned if they fall out of it. Although they wouldn't move Erod. They just signed him and he hasn't pitched for them yet. That would be weird. But, I feel like, another team that's not going to be aggressive, Arizona.
Yeah, I think that checks out to me. Still got young players that they just need to build around and hope they improve, like Corbin Carroll. Just need to get him back to himself. There's your second half addition. And with Merrill Kelly and Eduardo Rodriguez both tracking towards returns in the early second half, they might not actually need to add too much to that rotation. So might not be too busy of a deadline there in Arizona. How about the Padres? There's no chance that it's not busy there. Just AJ Preller doesn't do not busy. They're sitting 41-40 in that final wild card spot. Would imagine they're buying even if they go on a losing streak and fall to the back of this bubble. I think they buy because that's what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I was waiting for this one. I think the Padres will be aggressive. They've won 4 in a row. They could sweep the Brewers here today in a 4-game series. We've seen them be aggressive, bring in Dylan Cease. I think it makes sense for the Padres to add a pitcher for sure. Like they need another one. You look at their depth chart, what they got 4 right now. Like Cease, King, Waldron, and drawing a blank. Like they lost.
Randy Vasquez.
Yeah, they need
there.
help there.
Yeah.
So maybe Yusei Kikuchi makes sense to the Padres, adding an arm if the Jays opt to move him. If the Padres go a little cheaper, maybe Cal Quantrill. He's been better this year and a nice vet innings eater at the back of that rotation. I know the White Sox, we've heard of maybe they want to do a huge splash and trade Luis Robert and Garrett Crochet, but I don't know. I feel like that won't happen. It just feels like too huge of a move, although they could get a ton, the White Sox can. And given that the Padres have been aggressive, maybe that would be a fit. Although my thing is, if you're trading for Garrett Crochet, it's likely that you got to limit his inning. Like he's barely pitched. You got to think Crochet will have an innings limit, so maybe he won't even help you that much in the playoffs. So that's my hesitancy to say maybe the Padres go for Crochet, but I do think they'll add an arm.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, Crochet is going to be really tough to value for that very reason. He's definitely good enough to help a very good team. It's just, is he going to have anything left in October? Suppose the Padres could say we're going to get Yu Darvish and Joe Musgrove back, true. And we've got depth, but I don't know. I think it wouldn't hurt them to add an arm. I don't trust certainly Joe Musgrove the way that his health has been trending. Maybe Darvish I trust a little bit more, but could see them adding there as well. Looking at their depth chart, you would think they'd add a left fielder, but actually Jurickson Profar has been one of the best players in the league, so that's not a hole right now. I guess they probably wouldn't add over him, but certainly would expect them to try to add to the team in some way, even just a bat. We've got David Peralta at the top of their DH depth chart, so you could probably add more pieces there. Let's go. Sense. Yeah, one more team, I think, wrapping out the NL bubble is the St. Louis Cardinals. They are currently sitting with a wild card spot as well, 38 and 37. Strange team the last couple years here in St. Louis. Kind of feels like a 500 team is what they ought to be. So which direction do you think they're going in the deadline?
I would say if they do add the Cardinals, maybe they bring in a veteran arm like Tyler Anderson, who feels like he's likely to move from the Angels. He's had a pretty solid season. He could help out the Cardinals there. In terms of selling, I mean, I don't know. There's not that much they can really sell if you look like who's going to really be like Paul Goldschmidt's older now. Nolan Arenado's older. And you might as well just roll with them. Right. So I feel like a soft buy for them.
It would be Ryan Helsley, I guess. If they were to fall out of it, he would be one of the top closers, or he would be the top closer on the market. But if they're sitting in the playoff spot right now, they're going to have to fall to the back of this pile, I think, for them to want to sell, especially given the ages of the players you mentioned, right? With Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado there, you're going to be getting less from them or losing them in free agency in subsequent years. So it does kind of make sense to try to win with them while they're still here. So does that do it for all of the bubble teams? I feel like we both leaned by on nearly all of them. So I guess what's probably going to happen is that one or two of these teams is going to have a completely unexpected, terrible next 2 weeks and fall out of the bubble, right? But we just can't know which it's going to be. I mean, if the Astros say go 0-9 for the next 9 games, I mean, any of these teams, if they go 1-9 over the next 10,
yeah, that's true.
Probably push towards some sort of at least soft sell.
For sure. But, the likeliest feels like either not much or a really soft buy or really soft sell. Like nothing, I wouldn't say crazy.
All right. Well, hopefully we found a few spots that can help out fantasy players, or at least hopefully we did some nice therapy talking through the wonderful Blue Jays season so far for you. But thanks for coming on the show, Frank. Anything you'd like to plug on your way out?
Yeah, so you could check out my work at thegameday.com. I do fantasy waivers and closer rankings. I also post, if you're into betting, I post a lot of picks online on Twitter. Just check it out, and let's hope for an exciting trade deadline. I'm sure it will be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, soft buys all around, and that apparently is how things are going to go. trying to figure out who's going to sell all these soft players to all these soft buyers, but we'll find that out over the course of the next 5 weeks or so. Thank you, Frank, for being my guest today. Thank you to the listeners and chatters, and we will be back tonight. Jeff and Scott will be up wrapping up the Sunday Fab. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow or tonight on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Pick 6.